Hello, hello. We are back for another Wet Ink Wednesday, and this time I'm joined by Doug Levandowski, the other half of the design team for Home, and
Hey,
also the designer of a whole bunch of other stuff.
yeah.
What, what, what would you say is your flagship brand, like the one that you can't escape from? I mean, I think I know what it is, but what do you feel the one you that is your people might know you best from?
Yeah. So probably best known for Kids on Bikes. I think it's unlikely that I'm best known for Gothic Doctor, but um, I I met somebody over the weekend who said I was I was at Metatopia last weekend and I was with Tim Hutchings and getting introduced to some people and somebody was like, "Oh, oh, right, you did that game, The Wishing Sigil, with or I think they called it the Holiday Krampus game with Banana Chan, right?" And I was like, that's like a Doug Lewandowski deep cut on that one. Yeah, yeah, I did, and I love that game. And they were like,
I've
yeah,
you were doing this is setting up for the rest of the interview, but like you
yeah,
did several of those like micro games, like
yeah,
two designer micro games that were like
mm-hmm,
$1. Like you had like the Kickstarter was always like $1 to get the game because it
right,
was like 2 pages of printed text. You
right.
did I feel like you must have done like five of them, but maybe it wasn't that many.
I think I did about five. Yeah,
Yeah.
about close to a
Um
half dozen.
I,
Yeah,
and that comes up later. That's like
sure, sure, yeah.
something I want to talk to you
We'll
about
put a
is
pin in
is
that.
that sort of like anyway, we'll talk about that. But like
Yeah,
before we talk about any of that, I want to ask you because this is the first time you've been on Wet Ink Wednesday.
right.
I would love to hear how people get started in games. Like there's so many roots in, but I love to hear the story.
Yeah,
How did you become a person who makes game or not make games? How did you become a player of games at all? And
yeah.
then what's the next step that moved you to the designing?
Yeah, so we always played all kinds of card games in my house growing up. I mean, like nothing wild, right? Like Rummy, you know, War until we grew out of that, Asshole, Slapjack, like all of those, right? Um, I in seventh grade, being as unbelievably cool as I was carrying around a pinochle deck and teaching people pinochle. Uh, watch out, ladies. And and I would say around fifth grade or sixth grade, probably sixth grade, um, a friend of mine in Boy Scouts was like, "Hey, you guys want to play this game called Dungeons and Dragons?" And I was like, "I don't know what that is." He was like,
Does it involve Pinochle?
"Right, right. Hey, can we play Pinochle?" He's like, "No, nobody wants to play Pinochle, Doug." Um, and yeah, Andrew started running D&D for like five of us. And once in a while we would have a sleepover and like stay up too late uh and play Dungeons and Dragons, and I had a paladin who was total like wish fulfillment.
Yeah.
um
I'm
and like
shocked. I'm shocked that your first
right,
character was a
yeah.
paladin.
Every one of my characters turns into a paladin eventually. Even my chaotic neutral rogue from before, but that's another story. But yeah, it was and then I got into Magic the Gathering. I started when third edition was out, and I quit I think right before fifth came out.
Yeah.
So I had like a narrow window of
Yeah.
very intensive Magic playing.
That's about the
Um,
same. That's about the same period for me. And then,
right,
not again until,
right,
years in between
yeah,
games at this
exactly.
point.
Right, I'm staring at an entire two Calyx squares of boxes of Magic cards from recently, but um, yeah, and sort of fell out of that. And then always liked games. I kept playing a lot of party games. Taboo was one that um,
Taboo.
my friend Ben and I.
Did you ever hold down the buzzer and pretend to shave your face with the buzzer?
No, oh man, that's a good joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, no, I did not. I would have if I thought of it. That's good. No, we played so much that people stopped playing with Ben and I. They started just refusing. One of my best friends growing up, when one of the clues that we gave the other one was, oh, the one we can never get. And they said, oh, parachute.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's
so
yeah. The language that develops
right,
between the shorthand that develops when
right,
you're playing those kind of games.
yeah. And then college, a lot of poker, very stereotypically, right? Like early aughts college kid playing poker. Um, and then didn't play for a while, actually. And then sort of around the board game renaissance, started playing some stuff again and really got hooked back in with Catan.
Sure.
My brother-in-law was living with us for a little while, and almost every night, I would say like 4 or 5 times a week, we would play a game of Catan, my wife and my brother-in-law and me. And
It's a classic for a reason.
right, right. And when he moved out, I was like, oh, I kind of want to play Catan, but there's only two of us. And so Andrea and I tried to hack Catan to work as a 2-player game, and we couldn't quite crack it. But I think that also sort of started the design bug.
Yeah.
And then a friend of mine and I decided we wanted to make a game, because how hard could it be? And that was the first one that we put out, was called Gothic Doctor, and that was kind of how I got into the scene. We ran our first Kickstarter as like well, obviously people are just going to throw money at us because look, this one made $250,000 and I'd never heard of it, so obviously no one else had either.
Right.
The hubris of like first time kickstarting.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then when that went how we all know that went, how it
But
always goes.
but did it at least succeed? You may not
It
have made
did.
250,000, but did it at least succeed?
Oh no, like
Oh,
no, like I'm saying, like we saw other people making
yeah.
250,000. We
But
made like, I forget what we got on the first. Like we were asking for 20 and we got like 3 or something.
okay.
6.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, we were like, well, do we call it or do we keep going? And we kept going. And in the months leading up, once that was done being designed and we were just in the sort of awful, like non-designed stuff with it, all of the stuff that goes along that isn't the fun stuff.
Right.
I started doing the 24-hour contests on BGG. I don't know if they still have them, but for a year they do a 24-hour contest once a month where you get somebody would give a theme and you would make the best P&P game you could. And so doing that, I sort of started stretching a little bit, and wanted to keep going, and decided to, have another go at Gothic Doctor, and spent the next year revising it, refining it, like learning how to play test. Went to, I think my first convention was Dreamation. No, DexCon. That's the one in June. Or was it Dreamation? It was one of the two.
Right.
A convention in Morristown, and then and just got to know people and got more and more involved with it, and and then did board games for a little while, and then sort of naturally, I think, switched over to role-playing games because I've always been, I realized pretty quickly that I'm just way more interested in stories than mechanics.
Yeah. You say naturally, but that isn't necessarily a natural transition, but
Yeah,
if it is, if you are, like you said, more interested in stories, like,
right. Yeah, I mean,
so
like
were you
Gothic
trying to
Doctor.
put story into your hacks of Catan from the start? Like, was that why it didn't work?
No.
Or were you just feeling like, I'm trying to do this and I've got some games, and like you said, like it's pretty cool that you did the like 24-hour game jam
Yeah.
type things for a while. Were you always trying to put more story in than the mechanics would fit? Is that how you started to look for other games where you could do that stuff?
I think that was part of it. And also like, it was just more, story is more interesting to me. Right. Um, I'm a, I'm an English major, probably still would be considered an active English major. Right. I teach high school English. Um, and so, for me, it's story, story, story. And everything else is just there to create these cool moments that are the story. Um, and that obviously fits better with role-playing games than with tabletop. But like, even the first one, Gothic Doctor, came about because I had a dream about my dad, who's an MD, like pulling out Dracula's fangs, um, and being like, well, now he won't be a vampire anymore, buddy. And woke up and like texted John, the guy I co-designed it with, in the middle of the night, like, I've got our game.
I think I hadn't heard of Gothic Doctor until we were talking tonight, and
Yeah,
that's a good hook though. Like,
yeah. Thank you. I'll bring you a copy to PAX Unplugged. We still have a lot of copies.
so it finally did get made into something.
It did get made. Yeah, the second Kickstarter. So I spent the year. I say I, like I worked on it alone. We spent the year, refining it, play testing it, learning how to do Kickstarter,
Yeah,
and all that stuff, and learned all the stuff that goes along with it. And it was successful on our second go through.
that's good.
We Yeah, and so then we self-published it, put it out there, and yeah, and broke even on it, which I think is the mark of a successful first game.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, you take your lumps on the first one, you
Yep.
iterate, you learn some of how a Kickstarter works, and you are successful the second time and don't lose a bunch of money. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
these are all like marks of success on some level, you know.
right.
Um,
Uh, and at an unpub, I was talking to Brian Neff about games. One of the first times I met him, and he said, we were talking about role-playing games. I said, yeah, I play role-playing games. I play Dungeons and Dragons. He said, what else? I said, I used to play Dungeons and Dragons. He said, all right, all right. This is a game called Murderous Ghosts. And it was just such an intense role-playing experience that I was like, oh my God, like, they can do that
they
when
can
it's
do
this
that.
more open-ended storytelling. Like, betrayal is cool, but I'm never scared playing betrayal, right? Like, I like,
Do
there were
Betrayal at
two.
House on the Hill,
Yeah,
the
yeah. And
board
they were
game.
like, it's phenomenal. But in Murderous Ghost, there were like two times where I was like, I have to stop. Like, that this is too intense. And it was, so that sort of got me thinking about, how do I do this? And my first one that they got picked up by Ninth Level for their anthology Tragedies in Middle School, where the conceit was they're going to, it was actually like sort of kismet. I was thinking about weird resolution mechanics.
Hmm.
And how do you do something other than roll dice or draw cards, which is cool. Big fan of rolling dice, but like, as a coming in as a sort of tabletop game designer, sometimes that mechanical hook helps sell the thematic hook, right? And especially if
Absolutely.
you can fuse the two. So I was thinking, like, what would be an interesting resolution to a game? What if it was spin the bottle, and you have people that you like at the table and people you don't like, and if it's facing someone you like, you succeed, and if it's facing someone you don't like, you fail.
Wow. Yeah, I mean,
um
that is not often used as a resolution mechanic in a
right.
game.
And so I was talking to Brian about it, and he was like, yeah, yeah, that sounds good. You need a good name for it. So do you want to brainstorm? I was like, yeah, definitely. Like, oh God, well, like, you used to spin the bottle for like 7 minutes in heaven. So let's make it a horror game, 7 minutes in hell. Or it could be, is like, just stop, just stop. Got it in one. Your game's called 7 minutes in hell, and it's go. And so it became this thing where you are at a middle school party and accidentally summon some sort of demon,
As you do.
as one does, right? And things are getting worse and worse as the demon is like creeping into the world. And then eventually there's a possession stage. And then you do resolution. And it just sort of worked out that at the same time, and this is where the Kismet comes in, ninth level was doing an anthology of games called The Tragedies of Middle School, where they were looking for games and asking people to design games where people were using things you used to do in middle school as part of the thing. So there's one that has a cootie catcher in it, one has friendship bracelets, one has Bloody Mary, and it's a really cool anthology. But it just sort of worked out that, like, hey, we're looking for this, here you go.
Like I've already been working on that,
right? And that one was instructive and really fun to iterate and play test and work on. And that was, I think, when I got the RPG bug. And then, this is the well-trod story, but John and I set out to do, we both really liked Stranger Things and set out to do an RPG that could feel like that, or could feel like E.T., or could feel like Goonies.
right?
With this sort of open-ended world building, and wound up with Kids on Bikes, and then Teens in Space, and then Kids on Brooms, and then Kids on Bikes second edition, and then coming up Kids in Capes, and then we started kicking around another idea.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, I don't know. What I was thinking about when you were telling all that is like the thing about, and there's different ways to say this, but like, if somebody doesn't know you necessarily and they're like, oh, co-designer of Kids on Bikes, like
Right.
what a fortunate person to have had such a success,
Yeah.
that and a perennial, it become a series, and there's
Right.
board game expansions, and then
Mm-hmm.
isn't there like didn't it like Ouroboros itself into like, isn't there like media options that are like Kids on Bikes, the series or something? Did
No.
did I envision that? Did I make that up?
Well, it's called Stranger Things.
Well, I know there's Stranger Things, but like,
yeah.
what
No, but I mean, if anybody, any movie executives are watching,
right,
we'd love to talk.
but
We've
what I'm
got a
saying
magic
is
school
that
that,
like it didn't just, it's not like the what I was saying is that the preparation, it puts you in the position where you can have that success, right? Because
yeah,
it's like the opportunity presented itself, but you were already there working on stuff,
right,
and meeting these people and working on games and practicing yourself with your other games. It didn't just pure bolt out of the
right,
blue sky kind of situation, because
right.
you were there and doing some work that then you could turn into this thing that became a success.
Right. It was an overnight success, 5 years in the making on my part and 10 years in the making on John's part.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's, yeah, of course, that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
Yeah. And was shocking, right? For us, we assumed it was going to be, well, it would be cool if our friends bought it and we can not just put out a PDF, but could do books. That would be nice.
Yeah.
But yeah. And I've been surprised and really happy with how much it's resonated and all that good stuff. And it's been great. I think some people, we were sort of joking around before we started recording about the whole like golden goose thing and like the trap of success, right? And there's that spectrum of, do you come to resent this thing or not? And I at least haven't yet, right? My running joke with my friend Ben is, all right, this is my last Kids on Bikes thing because
we should move on.
I think it's run its course. And then John's like, let's do kids in capes. And I'm like, nah, man, masks exists.
Yeah.
And he's like, I think we could do something different. I'm like, but what? So I don't know, but think about it. I'm like, okay, fine. I thought about it. No. And then he said, hey, have you watched this show Stargirl? I said, no, is it good? He said, yeah, it's really good. So I watched the first 4 episodes and sent him a message and said, like, all right, you got me. Like, I see what you did there. You wanted me to watch that and say, okay, that hasn't been done in games.
That hasn't been done in games.
Let's do it. And that's how Kids in Capes got started, which is we're very focused on making it the experience of coming together as a superhero team.
Okay.
And the concept is you build your powers up as you go. There is a sort of ranking up system that's a little bit more linear than in Teens in Space you can buy new improvements and can sort of go on indefinitely. This has a sort of flow chart, and you can choose some different branches in it, but eventually you get to the point where you fully embrace your role on the team, which we're calling your cape, and you fully embrace your super ability, which is your power. And in your final capstone ability, you put those 2 together, and then you play 1 session with it, and that's it. Now you're a hero. Game's over. Game's over. You've won. Kids on Capes, go home.
Dude, that again, that's a good pitch. That sounds great. That's like a good and good idea. Good idea. You should do that game. Oh wait, you're doing it now. Great.
Right. And tested it over the weekend.
Yeah. So there's so much I want to talk to you about, Doug. And thank you for sharing all of that stuff.
Yeah, sure.
It's been contemplative and hopefully informative and with some other people. But you've mentioned working on all the kids games with Jonathan. And like I just know him as Jonathan Gilmore from the title from the cover of the book. You're like, oh yeah, John and I. It's like it's obviously like somebody. And you mentioned Wishing Sigil with Banana Chan, and I know you've got a whole other series of games that you've worked on other people with, and obviously you worked on Home with Yunsu Julian Kim. So like, what is it about working with another designer? What is it about co-designing that really gets you going? Because I think I told you before we started that like I think you co-design more of your games, or at least it seems to me, than other people, than most of the other people that I interact with.
Yeah.
So what do you like about co-designing a game? Because you've clearly done it a bunch, or you.
Yeah. Well, it starts with crushing insecurity. No,
and that's fair,
Yeah, I mean that's some of it, right? Like I know that other people's ideas are going to be good too, right? And there's, even if I'm designing a game solo, which doesn't happen very much, I can listen to feedback from playtesters, and I can listen to feedback from people I really, really trust. Like if I sit down and play it with a handful of people and they say, this is a problem, I know I'm going to trust them that it is. But there's, I think, something different sitting down with a co-designer and hashing it out together, and sitting down with like a critical friend and getting input. Something about that just feels different to me. And I mean, this is something I tell my students often before they get into group work. At this point in the year, my current students are probably sick of hearing it, so I think I've probably said it to them enough. But group work should be more difficult than working on it by yourself. But the product is going to be better. So, if you and I are working on a game together, we don't say, all right, I'll do the story, you do the mechanics, talk to you in 3 months, right?
Right. I mean, you could, but
it'd be
not be the most integrated way to go about it.
Right. A nightmarish mismatch. Maybe, who knows, right? The exquisite corpse of games. But if you and I sit down and go over every decision and talk through every decision, it's not me saying, oh, this is the game I would want to play.
Mhm.
It's me saying, oh, this is the game I would want to play. And you saying, but that part isn't good. And I say, but I really like it. You know, again, my friend Ben Brown and I worked on a game called Red Herring, which is a game about setting up one of those logic puzzles for somebody else in the form of a whodunit. We did this like 5 or 6 years ago, and we play tested it a couple times between the two of us. I was like, I love this. This is perfect. He was like, it's going to be niche though, because it's a logic puzzle. And we're like, okay. So we showed it to a friend of ours who's now has his, at the time he was a PhD student, but now has his doctorate in logic.
All right.
He sat down and he played it and he goes, because what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? We're like, we just made like an amazing logic game. He's like, I don't ever want to play that again. Right. So, I think you can get into your head, and obviously that was a case of a co-design, but you can get into your head where I wanted, as an homage to D&D, to put Thaco in the first Kids on Bikes for every skill check. And John was like, that was the worst. That was the worst thing Dungeons and Dragons ever did mechanically. No. And I was like, but an homage. She was like, we have the dice. Like, we're good. That's the homage.
I mean, there's homages and then there's like homages,
right,
like,
right. And
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. No. I was just going to say, I'm playing my campaign with my wife and her friend from elementary school, and her husband is running, and we've got some other friends playing. It's very very fun to play this game. But we're playing Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and there's a character named Thaco, and like that's it. He's just a guard in the first section of the game, and then it's like, yeah, everybody that knows what that means laughs, and everybody else is like, oh yeah, of course the half orc guard is named Thaco, like whatever.
And he's blocking the entrance for others, I assume.
I don't think that it was quite that much to that level, but I mean,
and I think in playtesting, eventually that would have gotten thrown out, right? People would have said, there's a cool concept here, but man, every time I make a check, I'm looking at a table. This sucks. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I like about co-designing is, even before we get it to playtesting, it's gone through a back and forth, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one thing. Another thing is, I'm doing this as, this is a hobby for me, right?
Sure.
I'm lucky in that it's now a hobby that pays for itself, which is great. Like, that was when I decided I was going to be serious about it and try to sell games. Andrea, my wife, was like, what's your goal? And I said, my goal is that at the end of the year, maybe I made a little bit more than I lost on this, from like buying games, going to cons, all that stuff. And I'm there, which is nice. So I don't need to churn. It's back to that thing about, like, it's easier to do a project. I can get a project done faster if I do it by myself.
Right.
Students can do a set of questions faster if they do it by themselves, but they'll have a better understanding. The answers will be better if they work with a partner. The games will be more developed, more cohesive, more smooth if I'm working with somebody else.
That's an excellent answer. I really,
and two more reasons.
Two more reasons.
This is why I do it so much. And also, as part of the hobby thing, I'm doing this for fun, and like, sure. I love writing, and that's why John and I work well together, because he hates it. But
yeah, it's great to have your partner compliment you, right?
Right, and it's great to, then it makes it a social activity for me and a creative activity. And I think, especially in the storytelling role-playing game space, making it that collaborative activity is cool. Like when Jules and I were working on the the stuff for home, we would sit on Zooms for hours at a time going through cards or like spitballing new cards and like going, oh, I hate that one so much. Yeah, that's good, right? Like, um, when do you realize your foot is broken? Oh yes. Um, I think that one didn't make the cut, but anyway, stuff like that where it isn't just work. It's we're going
Yeah.
back and forth. And the other one is the final reason is one of the most difficult things for me to find a way to do is playtest. I have friends who'll do it. I know people. I live not too far from others, but I've got a 5-year-old daughter. I've got a full-time job and then grading on top of it.
Sure.
And so to be able to get, I think, at least twice the playtesting, and usually probably 3 or 4 times the playtesting than I would be able to otherwise with a co-designer who then like says, hey, I looked at this and this and this, and here's what happened. That's beyond valuable. So
Yeah. I
those
mean,
4 reasons. Yeah.
yeah, those are all very good reasons. And
Yeah.
it makes me like I've got as my November project, I'm like, I'm gonna make a game just on my own on the side, like work on it just a little bit every day. And now I'm like, oh, I should give up and get a co-designer to make that game because it'll be better,
No, I mean,
so like
that's incredibly valuable too. I think it, like, for Below, which was one of the PDF only Kickstarters I did, that was like a really deeply personal game for me. It was a metaphor for my seasonal affective disorder, and I'm shocked it's not my most popular. But it was, that was very personal, and so that felt right to work on by myself. So I think there's space for both.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do want to be respectful of your time. You gave
Oh,
me a
that's okay.
time
Yeah.
that we need to stop. So
I've been rambling. We can go long.
there's a lot of things that we could talk about it, but I think what we have talked about it has been insightful and interesting to hear. So do you want to talk a little bit about Metatopia, or do you want to talk about like do you want to just jump right into talking about a little bit about home?
I want to talk about both of them.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, so to me, like you talk about, like you mentioned Dreamation and you mentioned DexCon and you've
Yeah.
mentioned PAX Unplugged and you mentioned Metatopia this past weekend
Mhm.
at the time of the recording. And so like clearly that going and doing and that having that connection with other people and playtesting experiences, but also
Mhm.
just the social aspect of it, that going to con is it can be so much fun
Yeah.
to go and see people. And so I'm not surprised at all that you are a regular. I mean, obviously you're closer than I am to the event, so that
Mhm.
helps, but like I don't know, what do you want to say about I feel like it's a natural progression from talking about
Yeah.
co-designing to talking about going to these events and living at cons
Yeah.
and really drawing the full experience of the community out of them,
Yeah. I mean, for me, there's like a sort of, as a high school English teacher, my year moves in the past 7 or 8 years has moved in like unbelievably predictable cycles.
Mm.
That the summer is when I do a bunch of design work. And then the school year starts and I'm overwhelmed. And then somewhere around the end of the first quarter, I say, man, I haven't worked on games anymore, but I don't have any ideas. Maybe that's it. Right. Maybe I'll finish out this one and that'll be it. And then I go to Metatopia and recently Unplugged and go, what? If I'm going to get all these done, I got to like quit my day job, but I don't want to quit my day job. Oh God, what am I going to do?
It's always so many ideas, so many
Right.
ideas.
and then that usually lasts until like the sort of doldrums of January, February, and then I have stuff I'm working on. I'm sort of just like, that's my like, just crank this out, like keep going, head down, keep working time. And then I'm like, well, but maybe after this, that's it. And then spring, I'll do something like Game and a Curry did spring break for a while when they were still on the East Coast, or stuff like that. And then that'll come roaring back, and I'll say, "Oh, I can't wait for school to be over, and then I can work on it again." And I work all summer, and then, so yeah, it's a sort of creative reinvigoration, because when I'm at the start of the school year, I'm only talking to people about school and pedagogy and education and reading.
Or, telling kids about who was born at Stratford-on-Avon,
Right, right,
again and again,
right. Yeah, I mean, that's a predictable cycle too, right? This is a side note, but a very cynical teacher I know described teaching as a Sisyphean act, to which I immediately clapped back. Yeah, like if the rock is the whole point, and learns things and is different when it gets up to the top of the hill and doesn't actually roll back down, yeah, it's just like Sisyphus. But it can feel that way, because it's like, I'm going to teach you how to write an inductive essay. Now go off. Now let me walk back down the hill. Now teach you. But
Right,
yeah,
right.
so
Those
those
rocks are
cycles,
turning into birds and taking flight, hopefully,
right?
right?
Those rocks are turning into like ROQs and flying off, right? And so going to conventions is, I think, like a very important re-energizing thing for me, and I think that's a big part of why my creative output in the past 3 years hasn't been quite the same, right? I mean, I think the two best things I've designed yet came out of the past 2 years, but it certainly wasn't the volume that I was used to, and it wasn't the sort of constant barrage of ideas that I'm saying, okay, you go over there and wait, right?
Right.
So yeah, and especially conventions like Metatopia, or this is more board game focused, but they're moving into RPGs a little bit. Something like Unpub,
Yeah,
is great for, hey, what are we here for? Playtesting. When are we going to do it? 18 hours a day. And it's just so good. And as an extrovert, I come out of those like vibrating. My wife and my daughter and I are going to a convention, Save Against Fear, in York, PA this weekend. And she's like, I'm just not used to seeing Condug. And I'm like, oh, he's a totally different beast. Because it's just so much fun. And I'm talking to people about games, and they're, I'm going to get to hang out with somebody I'm working on Kids in Capes with, who I haven't ever met in person at Save Against Fear. I'm going to get to finally meet Austin Knight in the flesh and get to know them. So yeah, that in-person playtesting and having the structure for it is so important, because I don't have that structure built in on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis. So yeah.
So do you have anything especially memorable that happened at this year's Metatopia that you wanted to talk about? You kind of set me up for this question earlier, but
Yeah.
if it's still relevant,
Yeah.
love to hear
So
about, like, an example to,
yeah.
concretize what you've been talking about,
Yeah. And I think this is also a perfect example of like being so inside something that you don't see the issues, right? And that's why I like co-designing. But John and I and Mo and Austin and Nick had run some internal tests of Kids in Capes, and we were like, yeah, the world building and the character creation, it all makes sense. Like, this is good to go. Like, it's very similar to what we've done before, and off we go. We just have the powers and the role on the team added in at the end. And we ran our first test of it, and it was just immediately clear that for people who everyone who was playing had played Kids on Bikes before, or Brooms or Space, and the sequencing of character creation was completely out of whack. And what we had to do was I spent all of Saturday morning rewriting and restructuring and revising character creation to make it make sense based on that playtest. We found that the players didn't feel like they could answer any questions about their characters until they knew what their powers were going to be.
Mm.
And until they knew what their role on the team was going to be. And we said, well, right, but we're not going to get to really any playing. We're just testing world building and character creation, but it's going to be a session or two before you have your powers, right? So build the character you want to play and go from there. And they were like, oh, okay. Well, my character is going to be able to control fire.
Right.
So it would make sense for them to be this kind of character. We're like, oh yeah, okay, got it. Right. So
it's so like a genre thing where it's
right.
like it's so tied to the
right,
like I said, to the genre. That
right.
you've got to know in some respects how it is. It would be I could foresee a game, and maybe this is what you were trying to do, where it was like you don't know what your power is going to be. You're just going to be a regular teen
Right.
until or a kid or whatever until you get a power, and then
Right.
roll the d20 and that's your power, and it either fits you well or it doesn't,
Yeah.
and that's a whole other
Right.
way to tell a story. But
Right.
I think people sitting down, I agree with your playtesters without having played the game, that like if you're sitting down to play a game that has capes in the title, like that's such an integral part of it. So
right. And it's always been, all of the other games are you create the world, you sort of set up the broad strokes of the story you want to tell, and then you pick your trope and then you go from there. But yeah, this absolutely was, and our intention was people would pick their powers after they made their trope, right? That once you know who your character is going to be, you can say, okay, cool, now do I want to pick a power that makes sense for them?
Yeah.
Or one that's like, here's this like very uptight, controlled character who now shoots blasts of uncontrollable fire from their left hand, right? And now am I going to play around with this being like the wrong power for this person? And players wanted it the other way. They wanted to pick the power, pick their role on the team, and then build from there. And in our second playtest, that went phenomenally. I think, and we'll see. More playtests, it might be different.
Sure,
but
it's still in the thing. Because I mean, I definitely see either way, because there's narrative tension,
right,
in both. Like you talked about flowcharts earlier, like there's narrative tension going down each path.
Yeah. And then one of the things that was really great to see in that one was we had a combat system that we really liked, and we were like, yeah, this is going to be great. It's intuitive, it's simple, and it just didn't land. And this was our high test with other designers. Kiva Fecteau was in there. Josh Heek, Kevin Culp, and Glenn Given were our playtesters. And like, I've had groups that were as good, but I've never had a better group. And it was fine. It worked, but we're not after it was fine. It worked. Right.
Right.
And so over pierogies that night, John and I just hashed it out. Right. And
I mean,
and
pierogies make everything better. So
I've always, right. And I don't know, it's one of those things that sounds really good on paper, but we're going to try it this weekend at Save Against Fear. We're going to run some tests. Austin and I are, and who knows, this one might crash and burn too, but that's like, you can theorize about it and I can like run through it in this big bald head of mine, but like it's not anything until it works on the table.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of my favorite things about playtesting it and being in that space.
So I'm gonna accelerate our conversation right into the middle of the next
Yeah.
thing that we want to talk about, and pick up on that phrase that you just said, that it doesn't, you could think about it, but you don't know if it works on the table until you
Yeah.
get it to that point. Like what was the point that you got home to that point? What happened that made home reach where you were like, aha, we figured it out. Good
Yeah.
job, Jules. We got it.
Yeah.
Like what was that moment, and how many years into development did that moment come?
Yeah. I think I've been working on home for 5 years, maybe more. Yeah, I think I started home shortly after I like handed off first version of Kids on Bikes.
Wow.
And that was originally a solo design. And originally it was you are going to be moving around a map that you are going to create of this house, and the questions were there, the phases of night were there to make things get worse a bit. It wasn't nearly as strong, but the conceit was you are playing yourself. And the first 2 play tests I did on that, immediately somebody went, "Oh no, absolutely not."
Uh-huh.
Right? It was like, no, it's okay. Like, I guess you can fictionalize a version of yourself. They're like, "No, absolutely not."
Yeah.
Because it was very focused on the return to childhood. Was there weren't separate haunting tales. Um, that was one of Julian's phenomenal ideas, to make it more modular. Uh, but everything was about your childhood coming back to haunt you, and shockingly, some people don't want to do that.
It's
Um,
like it's the seasonal affective
right,
disorder game all over again.
right. I don't understand. Um, and so so we worked on that for a little while, and we did away with I was like, well, let's make it an option. And Julian was like, well, let's track how often, because by then we were working on it together, right? I'd asked them if they wanted to co-design, and they said yes. Because I was sort of stuck on that one. And also I just wanted to work with them. And I said, like, let's keep it as an option. You can do this or you can do this. And they said, sure, let's just keep an eye on how many people choose themselves.
Uh-huh.
And then we introduced the archetypes, as ways of picking, because some of those questions that we were asking similar questions to what we have in the archetype cards, but they were very open-ended. And so people were having a really difficult time pinning down what would my need be. That was one of the most difficult things. And eventually we just made that a choice. Your need is this or it's this.
Right.
Pick one and go for it. And that helped a lot. And that's where co-designing, I think, comes in. I could sit and brainstorm stuff, and I might get out of 105 good ideas. Or I can sit there with Julian, and we can, oh, that makes me think of this, which makes me think of this, which makes me think of this, right?
It's like, I think maybe you only get 20 ideas because it takes you longer to hash them out, but it's like 15 of them are good instead of it's a higher hit rate or whatever.
Right, because of, I'm sure this isn't like neurologically sound, but instead of just like firing neurons around in one area, right? Julian's going to say something that's going to send me over here, and then to get there, I'm going to go through there.
I think that's how the brain works.
Yeah, it's just
I
zip zap zop, right? But and yeah, that playtesting process, just again and again. But you had asked about the moment, and I think it was the biggest pivot was I went out for a week to work on games with John out in Ohio, and we sat down to play an early version of this, and we got a little bit in, and he said, "Have you played The Quiet Year?"
Hmm.
And I said, "No." He said, "I find that hard to believe because there's stuff going on here, the things getting worse as you go through the creation of this physical space. All that's there, but," and he said this lovingly and kindly and honestly, "but The Quiet Year does it so much better." Um, and
That's
so we
that's why you need a long relationship with a co-designer where they can give you the bad news.
right. And I mean, he's absolutely right. The Quiet Year does it better. And it so we like swept the table clean with deft movements of our hands, and popped out The Quiet Year, played, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay. And then as borrowed a lot of stuff from The Quiet Year, reached out to Avery and very graciously said we could sort of build it on the bones of that. And that, I think, was the sort of pivot moment, right? Because The Quiet Year does such a good job of linking everything together, right? And establishing this sort of creeping sense of dread, right? Because at some point in the winter, the frost shepherds will come. I forget what and it's like, what are those? But you don't know that yet. What do you mean I don't know that yet? So yeah, that, I think, was the pivotal moment, seeing how well The Quiet Year gets everything to fit together in this way that just reading it on the page you wouldn't expect. Like, okay, great, you draw a map and then you turn dice to count stuff down. Yeah, got it. Okay. It's alchemy, right? It is more than the sum of its parts, and I think that certainly helped me see how we could do some of that with home. And I think that was a pivotal moment. That was also like very early into when Jules and I were working on this together. So yeah.
I
So
love
yeah.
I love that you described like hours long conversations because I can so easily imagine it. It just sort of, yeah, like you were saying, spitballing and just kind of accelerating past each other to like, what, no, that good, but like what if we also do
Yeah.
this or whatever,
Yeah.
um yeah, it's it. And so then has it how long since then, like how long, you said 5 years total, but like when, if Julian came on early on
Yeah.
relatively, like, and then I mean, also it's been a year since the crowdfunding at the point of
Mm-hmm.
recording, and like I showed you earlier, but I'll move
Yeah.
the camera, we've got some production samples from the Haunting Tales,
Mm-hmm.
because there was a design process for the stretch goals and the administration of that stuff. So it's been, how, I don't know, how long has it been, uh how long did it take once you and Julian knew what you were doing, or what you wanted to do? How long was that design process?
That, I think, was the summer of 2019.
Wow.
Maybe it was the summer of no, it was definitely not the summer of 2020. We didn't do anything that summer.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is this like a 2020 game that like it's got the isolation and stuff
Yeah.
because that's when you were working on it, or but if not, but if it started before then it isn't.
Oh yeah, it definitely started before. And we worked, that became my like pandemic project, right? That was at the beginning when everybody had all the energy in the world because they weren't doing anything else, right?
Right.
And well, we're only going to be here for like 6 weeks. I'm going to make the most of it.
We get all
And
of these card prompts written.
right, yeah, yeah, and we were well into that part, and that's when we really honed in on and narrowed down the different haunting tales, and how to make that modular, and how to, a lot of shifting away from, because a lot of the original questions were solely focused on childhood, right? Like, and so, sort of filtering through and saying, okay, we'll shift this so that it's not as about your past, or, beef that up so that it's lean into this side more than that side.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that was at the latest, the summer of 2019. I don't think it was the summer of 2018, because my daughter would have been just born the previous December, and I don't think I would have been like, well, bye. But I wouldn't put it past me necessarily.
But is there something? Is that like part of where the game started for you? Because you talked about it being like you're going to play yourself and you're going to return to your childhood. Like, is like becoming a father like tied up in there somewhere at the very at the very small streams that started this process? Perhaps is there something there, or is there not something there?
I'm not sure. I'd have to go, certainly not consciously. I'd have to go back and see like where my notes are from it. Because I think I may have started it, and if so, that means it's more than 6 years. Almost at least 7 years old, at least. I think I started it before I knew I was going to be a father. But I'm just fascinated by I'm fascinated by the way that we bring ourselves into games. I said that earlier on, like every one of my characters winds up being a paladin in D&D. And
yeah.
And that's because like that's my wish fulfillment, right? I can be anything I want. Okay, cool. I want to be like the person who's able to help people,
right,
and defend them, and then both defend and heal them in some ways, right? So I'm fascinated by the ways that we bring ourselves in, not even necessarily bleed, where like we do it unintentionally, but I mean, I guess bleed. I don't know.
It's sort of like meta bleed, because it's not, or I don't know. It's not meta bleed, but like that's, I don't need to. I'm sure I don't know much about the LARP community, so I they probably have a term for this, right? Already, so yeah, I don't need to invent terms that may already exist.
They already.
But it is sort of like you're always, I mean, I guess the way I would say it is that you're kind of always playing yourself, no matter what you do. You're either playing yourself, or you're playing the person you're not, or you're, which is therefore who you are, because you're consciously playing who you're not, that kind of stuff. It's like kind of always there.
Yeah, I was starting to read an essay by Lizzie Stark, I think, on this, about role playing and LARPing as, I forget what the term was. See, I read the article very closely. I read it enough to know I want to read this article more, so that means the first like 2 paragraphs. But it was the idea that in life we're always presenting different sides of ourselves, right? Like,
oh, of course.
After we finish interviewing, I'm going to go upstairs and hang out with my wife and present a very different side of myself than I'm presenting here. And at school, I was presenting a very different side of myself at PD today, professional development today, than I was yesterday with student, and
right, we contain multitudes,
right. And I think role playing allows us to explore those multitudes, or even explore things that aren't in our multitude that we want to find out about. But I'm interested in I myself tend to be more interested in exploring my own
Yeah.
multitude, which sounds super solipsistic, but um,
Or
I'm
like a
really
facet,
not
like
that
no,
arrogant. Yeah,
it's yeah, know thyself or whatever,
yeah,
it's let me explore these different elements of myself and what
yeah,
unites them or holds them together or whatever. It makes sense to me.
yeah,
Think of it that
yeah.
way.
And I think home came out of that, right? Like, what? How can we delve the bad parts to find out more about where we are now and
Hmm.
what we've let go of, what we've destroyed, what still wants to destroy us,
Yeah.
um, which makes it sound super highbrow and pompous. But that's why I co-designed with Julian, so we can not have just a game about like navel gazing.
That's right. That's right. Uh, yeah. All right. Well, Doug, thank you so much for I think it's a good place to that's as good a place as any
Yeah,
to end the conversation. I think it's been a great conversation. Definitely we've talked for a while and it's been I really appreciate you giving your time to me
absolutely.
and to the audience that is going to watch this when it's posted. So
Yeah.
before we go, please tell people where they can find you if they want to plumb your depths
Yep.
more. Where can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, that answer has recently changed. So I'm over on Blue Sky now, very infrequently. I'm also on Facebook, but uh, not as much for random friend requests.
Sure.
I guess,
Are
yeah,
are your
it's
tiny
hard.
games available? Like is do you have an itch.io
Oh
page where
yes,
people
yes,
can get all your like little co-design games?
yes. It is. Let me look this up. I think I know it. Yeah, so it's douglevandowski.itch.io. Has most of my has five of them, five of my small games, um, and then I think most of the others are on Drive-Thru RPG or wherever great games are sold
Wherever get games are
for
sold.
the physical
And
ones. So
and you can search yourself up Kids on Bikes. It's available widely.
yeah, and home soon, which is yeah,
Yes. It's at the time of recording, it is we got the notification today that the production sample of the actual box set, not the expansion packs that I have here,
yeah.
is being shipped today as of recording. So
I'm
by the
so
time this
excited.
posts, we'll be
Ah!
seeing it soon. We'll be seeing it soon. So we're excited, all of us that have worked on it. So
Yeah.
all right, Doug, thank you again.
Yeah,
Have a good night.
Matt, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Yeah. And thank you everyone to watch this video.